Welcome to the Mavericks podcast. In this episode, there was a specific story that was on my mind about leadership and changing behavior. This was something that happened relatively recently, and I decided to write it down and address it. And it's something that helped me be at peace in my home and maybe can help you in your situations as well. It's a relatively simple story. I have two examples, one where I addressed it the wrong way, and then one where I addressed it in a much better way that left both parties feeling much better afterwards. And so this has to do with when I first moved to Georgetown, which was about 2 months ago now, I think. October, November, December. So we're going on like 2.5 months, right? And when we moved here, it was me and my sister. And I had kind of laid some ground rules when we moved in. And one of them was I wanted a clean space. And you can't see much in my room, but there's like one thing out of place, and that's my jacket. But for the most part, I like it to be clean. There's a carpet in here, but it's hardwood floors throughout the rest of the building. And the main thing was I lived with 3 guys, or including me, 3 guys. And on the off chance that I was actually home, it seemed like it was just always a mess. And that was just, of course, my opinion, and that's what I saw when I was there. But I wasn't seeing the whole picture, you could say. So I didn't want that in this place. It was actually mine, and mine to build up, from the ground. So that was one of the first things that I addressed when we got here. And at first, I didn't really notice much because I was always in here. I was always working. And it got to the point where now that I have a little bit more free time, turn this off. There we go. I started noticing that everything was kind of getting dirty. And I didn't know how I felt about that. At the time, I didn't have much of a say as far as I didn't feel obligated to say something because I wasn't doing a very good job in my space as well. I didn't have a vacuum cleaner, so I couldn't vacuum. And in my mind, that's well, if I'm going to start cleaning something, it has to be on the schedule consistently. So I didn't want to start cleaning with not the right materials and then not be able to get to it consistently over time, because then it would have just bothered me. So I waited on that for a while. And then it kind of seemed like a lot of stuff was building up in the living room, in the kitchen. And it started to bug me, and I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to traverse outside of my room. And I started addressing said situation. The first time was nice. And then, or as nice as I saw it, I guess, back then. And then, as it happened more and more, I got more and more frustrated, right? You'd expect that. And the frustration would come out when I was talking, okay? Which is not the best thing. And internally, I knew that. But externally, I was frustrated. I was tired. And notice how this is all about me, right? I was tired. I was frustrated. And I just was like, I want to have something clean. And then, off the charts, whatever. And so, with addressing that problem, the next few times, it was just anger. It was just anger coming out of me and flooding into someone else. And I'm not a big advocate for that, especially with what I'm leaning towards and working towards, right? So one day I was just kind of sitting with it and thinking, why is this happening? What am I doing wrong, because obviously every time that we talked, something would get done, but then it didn't last over time. And the idea is to have a change last over time rather than just me addressing it every time. And that's part of the frustration was I wasn't, whenever I would address the situation, it would get fixed in the moment, but then over time, it would just come back to the way it was. And so I sat with this for a while. And eventually, I got back into reading one of the books that I actually just finished the other day, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People, so Dale Carnegie. Older book. It was one of the more recent, I don't know if they call it remastered or whatever, but like they went over it, edited stuff like that. And I finally got to reading it again, sat down, and things were clicking in my head. It's like, oh, I'm not addressing any of these situations in a good way, and it's just leading to more and more frustration. And obviously I wasn't very happy with that, with myself especially, because I know better and I should be doing better, right? So after sitting with that for a while, I had another opportunity come up where I started cleaning. I had just gotten, the vacuum's irrelevant, but I just got in the vacuum and I cleaned my room, cleaned what I could, and got things to where I was satisfied with it. You say, I'm not a perfectionist or anything, but I like, especially with a hairy dog, I don't like all the hair, right? So one new situation came up, and immediately I had that first mindset, and I was just going to walk out, say what I needed to say, and then be done. And I caught myself right before going out, and it's like, no, that's not what we need to do. That's not how we're going to get anything lasting changed, right? So I sat with it for about 5-10 minutes thinking about how I could address it. And the best thing that I came up with was checking up on how the other person was feeling. So checking out, addressing the situation, say, hey, in this case, hey, why didn't this get done, right? And immediately, if your situations are usually extensive or frustrating, then they're immediately going to be like, oh no, or I'm in trouble, right? So that's kind of what I sensed when I went into this situation. And I immediately tried to change that perspective. And it's like, no, genuinely, like in your mind, why hasn't this gotten done? And then it provoked a response, and you get to hear what the other person, if they're willing to open up into that extent, you get to hear what the other person's actually thinking and what's in their mind. And whether or not it's truthful or deceit, or not deceit, but truthful or lying, it doesn't matter so much as to you're allowing them to feel heard, right? So even if they're not fully telling the truth or fully going into detail, you're getting a little piece of them on the situation, on what they think about it, right? And what I learned was now I'm opening the conversation up to connect with the other person rather than just being closed off and authoritarian, right? It's like, hey, this needs to get done. It's been however long, whatever. We don't want that, right? Because it's like a Band-Aid. You just fix it once, never again, right? And then you have to just keep applying, keep reapplying, Band-Aid, Band-Aid, Band-Aid. It's not a permanent fix. And so addressing it this way, I got to hear from the other person's perspective, and it kind of opened my mind a little bit. It's like, hey, this is what this person thinks. So, right, this is how I see it, and this is how the other person sees it. Drawings aren't important, but it's different, right? And that's what we're looking at. So she's thinking one thing, I'm thinking one thing. We're both different people. And we're not going to think about things the same way, especially coming from different backgrounds, different sources, similar backgrounds, I guess, and putting pieces together differently. So this new approach, which was more understanding the person rather than the situation, I tried to understand what was going on in her mind so that I could take that information and apply it into mine and into my own understanding of the situation. And in the process of doing so, we had an actual conversation rather than me being frustrated and the other person going off the walls, right? Or not off the walls, but like shutting down and just completely shutting out everything after that. And even during this conversation, she tried to get up and start doing stuff. I was like, no, don't do that right now. Like I just want to talk. And so addressing it in that way allowed for a connection. And that's kind of what I'm, I guess, getting at here, is that connection allowed for genuine conversation rather than just a one-way street where I would be saying something, and if someone's coming at you angrily, you're going to kind of block out what they're saying in one ear, out the other, right? And that's not necessarily what we want. After this happened, after this final kind of, not even really incident, but it looked at it differently, right? After this conversation, in the weeks following, it's noticeable improvement. Any conversation, I have like no frustration, no anger, anything, right? Because everything's just been conversational. And that's how I want it. And it's not how it used to be, right? So it's a lot of ease off my mind and the other person's mind in these situations. And so what changed is that both people felt heard. Both people felt like they were being communicated with in a way that was not isolated one way, frustration, right? And it was more of a genuine conversation. So what I ended up doing ultimately was I addressed the person, understood their perspectives on the situation, and then I applied that to the actual situation in hand. Because what people feel, what people are going through, it's all true, but there's a larger perspective that you can look at, right? And that's kind of how I try and look at things. So let's say these two, so this is hers, this is mine, and then we'll say this box is the overall situation. This is what we're trying to get at. So if we can figure this whole big picture out with the smaller bits and pieces, so in this case, two people, then it helps to realize the big picture and solve it, get out of it, whatever you'd like to do. So that's kind of what I did. I took her perspective, my perspective, tried to understand the entire situation, and then addressed what could be changed. So then I introduced a new perspective on why certain things would be beneficial if we tackled them in a certain way, right? And in this case, cleanliness. Why in the world would you ever want something to be clean? Everyone has their own reasons for it. For me personally, it just makes you feel better. Not living in a clutter, living in something that's somewhat organized where you can find everything and then it's just not dirty. it just helps. It helps you feel not so dirty. I, I feel like I've completely butchered that sentence, but it helps you feel clean, helps you feel like everything's not cluttered. Because in my experience, if this area is cluttered, I feel like I can't think and I feel like I can't breathe. And especially with the hair is what gets me personally. So when I have a specific stuff that I wear when I'm working on my computer or writing or something in here, because there's a lot of hair. And I mean, there's not right now because I cleaned, but there tends to be a lot of hair between the times that I clean because she sheds a lot. My dog. So, excuse me. When it gets too hairy, I guess you could say, I feel like, it's it's too cluttered. I feel like there's so much everywhere I can't think straight. And then I even put on headphones to block out noise, like ambient noise. So I just like it silent when I work, especially in the morning. So seeing all the hair, in this case dirtiness, and seeing it throughout the house, just not clean, not organized, stuff like that. When I'm walking through it mentally, I'm like, this sucks. I don't like this, and so I want to change it. And having that cleanliness allows us to feel more clean, and then it also keeps you from thinking about it on the back end. So then you can just look nice and clean, and then just move on with your day. And so it helps. It also, some of the stuff that was addressed, when it stays clean, there's less of a smell, and there's less likelihood of other things happening. So let's say the dog eats cat litter. Well, that can really mess up her stomach, and that's long term, but also it not getting clean leads to the other animal using the bathroom on things that we don't want to use the bathroom on, which was another thing that really was frustrating for me specifically, because I don't want to just throw things away. I want to keep the stuff that I like. So in this situation specifically, there's multiple ways that you can go about it, but for what I did, I just explained this is why these things would be beneficial if we kept them clean in the future. And since then, it's been kind of smooth sailing, at least mentally for me, on her part as well. Because we've even talked more since then. So look at that, right? It just, overall, it helps when you address it that way. And it can kind of be simplified as in the tone that you approach it in. The tone, and also what's approached first. And I say that because if you go in just saying, hey, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, they're going to be like, oh, well, I guess I'm horrible at everything, right? There's another concept where you address what they're good at, or what they're doing that's good. So addressing what's good. And then after that, you kind of introduce the things that are like, hey, I'm not necessarily satisfied with this or this. And you don't have to word it that way, but that's just a simple wording that I remember from the book, right? But you address what's working good. What is she doing good, right? She's doing a good job. And I try and remind that to her often, because it is a new thing for her and for me, kind of, but for her, it's all new, right? So if we want to make sure that people know that they're valued and they're someone to be grateful for, in my case. And then introducing, and this is one thing that I know I could have done better, is naming stuff that she's doing good, stuff that is going good, and then introducing what's going wrong. Yeah, whatever. I can't write down that far, but that's another way that you can address it. And if there's one thing that I would change about how I address the situation, I would do that first. just because it helps people feel more uplifted, and then you bring, the bad news, quote unquote, but it doesn't necessarily change overall, right? They feel like they feel, helps them feel more valued. And then you lead them into the other stuff. And then it gives them something to strive for. And you can also lead by example, which is what I tried to do that day. So if you can lead by example, people will naturally follow. Right? Especially if it's something that's valuable. So if you're doing something that's valuable, you don't have to tell them to follow you. They'll naturally buy into what you're quote unquote selling, even though you're just doing it, right? And then they'll follow you. And that's another way that I have tried to have impacts in some of the people's lives around me in the past. So there's a lot of ways you can address this. The one that I did specifically was I just understood the person, applied that perspective to the entire situation, and then addressed the situation from a way that we could both benefit from it. And that's what happened. And so in this story, it's hard not to get frustrated at people, I understand that. But having that different perspective to be able to just, sorry about the clicking, to be able to address that situation out of curiosity and questioning, not in an aggressive way, but if you can question and have a sense of curiosity in that situation, it helps you learn more than what you would if you were just angry. Because every experience I've had with anger, it just shuts you off. And you don't get anywhere. You really don't. And it keeps you from having that genuine sense of curiosity. And likewise, curiosity shuts off anger. So if you get someone who's angry at you, right, this is a side note, if someone's angry at you, if you get them to start questioning things, eventually that anger will kind of subside and go down, So for this story, that's kind of the goal, right? Just understand the whole situation. Try not to be angry. There's a lot of stuff that I could talk about with this story specifically, but for now, this is a mess of a board, actually. But I mean, just understanding the person in the situation, it helps a lot. But yeah, that'll do it for this one.